The reading is from the very end of Matthew's Gospel, the end of chapter 28, the Great Commission. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Joy. I was a bit worried then, because as I sat next to Jenny, she's writing down Matthew 28, obviously expecting me to preach on it. And you say, well, aren't you going to? Well, I'm sure you've heard a lot of sermons preached on that passage. It's a favourite passage when we're encouraging people to tell other people about Christ. But whatever you have learnt about that passage so far, there's one thing that you can't help but miss, and that is that it's all about saying goodbye. Jesus is saying goodbye to his disciples. And we all say goodbye to people. I do it quite a few times in the week. Most of you know I take funeral services, and at the end of the service I go outside and shake hands, and often that can be with as many as 1,500 people a week, and it always fascinates me what they say to as they leave. Hopefully, and usually it's thank you for a lovely service and things like that. If it's been really good, people say, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" And I say, "Yes." I even had somebody who came out, it was a service for a scaffolder, and is this dropping out or is it all right? Do you want me to stand? Shall I lift it up? And he said to me, I don't really know, but I believe in a God at his best when we're at our worst. I'll stick with this one. Alex Mattia, who's a Bible commentator, used that expression to describe a name for God, El Shaddai. God who is at his best when we are at our worst. But then I did another service, and somebody came out, and apart from thank you for a lovely service, it was, "Oh, you take services at Woodford. I saw your name. I recognize you." I said, "Great." And then I shook hands with another lady, and then this lady said, "Do you know Penny Whitell?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Are you her dad?" And I said, "No." But we all have to say goodbye to people, don't we? But some goodbyes are more challenging than others. Here we are at the end of September, their parents saying goodbye to their children as they drop them off at university, knowing that for their children, life is going to be very exciting, but for them, life is going to be very different. And here today we've got this time when the disciples, the famous 12, have now become the famous 11. And they're on the Mount of Olives knowing that they're going to be saying goodbye to Jesus for the last time. I feel really sorry for them, to be honest with you. For 3 years they followed Christ. They've been with him through great times and tragic times. Times like they couldn't have believed, a real roller coaster ride. Times when they've been fishermen and Jesus has said, "Come and follow me," and they give up everything and they follow him. Simon Peter, the first thing that happens is his mum-in-law's not very well, and Jesus heals her. And then they go on and they watch Jesus do miracles. They listen to him teaching. And everything that Jesus says makes sense. There's no malice in it. They've been used to hearing things that say, you must do this, you must do that. But Jesus says, the most important thing is your relationship with my Father. And then something even more amazing. Not only do they hear Jesus teaching and they witness him performing miracles, Jesus says, you can do this too. Go out in my name into places and heal people. We think about the Spirit coming at Pentecost. Well, the Spirit obviously came long before that, because these disciples, when Jesus isn't with them, have the power in the name of Jesus to go and heal people. And then it all goes wrong. They thought there was going to be some uprising, that Jesus was going to be the person who would set Israel free, get rid of the Romans, get their country back. And this story is right up to date. And what they witness is within a week, Jesus is being treated like a king. People are shouting, Hosanna. Just 5 days later, Jesus is being tried for sins he hasn't committed because of populist opinion and because of political opinion. And on that same day, that night and the following day, they watch all their dreams and hopes just disappear. It's just like someone's pulled out the plug and everything's gone. Jesus is dead. They place him in a tomb. And then 3 days later, one of their friends called Mary comes running back and says, he's not there. He's alive. John and Peter go running to the tomb. John gets there first. Peter doesn't care. He runs in. And it's true. And over the next weeks, they're going to meet Jesus on a number of occasions. He's going to appear to those two men leaving Jerusalem, believing that Jesus is dead and in a tomb back in Jerusalem, but he isn't. He's walking along the roadside beside them. Then there's a time when they're in a locked room. Thomas is there, and he said to the disciples that you may tell me that Jesus is alive, but I don't believe it. And what's more, I'm not going to believe it unless I can put my hands and touch his, put my fingers into where the nail prints are, touch his side. And Jesus appears and says, here I am, Thomas. I want you to do what you said you wanted to do. And Thomas immediately falls to Jesus' feet and says, my Lord and my God. And Jesus says to Thomas, Thomas, you believe because you have seen me, but blessed are those who believe even though they won't see me. Of course, there's more stories, the one about how the disciples go fishing, catch nothing, and then they meet a stranger on the shore and they catch 153 fish. And then the Apostle Paul tells us about a story when Jesus appears to 500 people at once. There was no question that Jesus was alive. Lots of people will try and find reasons to doubt Christianity, but they don't take time to actually read the evidence. But here they are back on this hillside. And it's what Jesus says to them that's really important. See, Jesus doesn't say goodbye. He tells them that he's loved, that they're loved and valued. Well, how does he do that? Well, the first thing he says is, I am with you always. I mean, that's the sort of thing that, Penny says to me and I say to her, when we're going, bye, darling, I'll always love you. I mean, songs have been written about it, haven't they? I will always love you. Whitney Houston, forever, forever, forever. You'll be the one, Demi-Roussos. You know, that's what it's about, being in love. I'll love you forever. And Jesus says, look, I will always love you. But he says one other thing. He says, you're valued. You're important. You see, if you take your car to the garage, you don't take it to some dodgy mechanic to fix the brakes. You take it to somebody that you can trust. And Jesus is saying, look, I started the work. I trust you. I love you. I value you. And you're the ones that are going to continue the work. And again, you're going to have my Holy Spirit, the power of God to enable you to do that. The only problem is, and as Jesus ascends, he blesses them as he goes. The only problem is, so often when God calls us, either we don't think we can do it, whatever job he's given us, or else other people say we can't do it. So I want us to look at 3 people this morning, one in the Old Testament, one in the New Testament, and one from the 19th century, who God called them, but it didn't seem like it was going to happen. And the first is Moses. You know the story of Moses, the chosen people of God who've been living in this land which is in turmoil at the moment. After Abraham, there's Isaac and Jacob has children, and they fall out and they try to kill their brother Joseph, and he ends up, after some ups and downs, being in Egypt, being the right-hand man of Pharaoh. And there's a famine in Israel, and they have to go to Egypt to get grain. Eventually, that relationship with Jacob and his son Joseph is restored. And because of Joseph, Pharaoh gives them a piece of land to live in. It's a good piece of land, a piece where they can keep their sheep. And then the story's right up to date, because what happens is these people that have gone into Egypt, well, they're really good at making babies, the Israelites. And the Egyptians are saying, look, these people are taking over our country. What are we going to do about it? Well, they do something drastic. They decide that every male child under the age of 2 will be killed. Every male Hebrew child, that is. And there's this lady who's just given birth to a baby boy, and she loves this child, as people do. So she makes a basket of bulrushes and she puts him in the river. She doesn't know what's going to happen next, but God does. And this little basket with this precious baby in floats down the river. And Pharaoh's daughter sees it. She gets one of her servants to take it out. And in a little twist to the story, one of her servants is the lady whose baby it is. This lady is actually paid for bringing up her own son. And Moses lives in a very privileged position in the court of Pharaoh. He's so fortunate, but then it all goes wrong. Something happens and he makes a huge mistake. He murders someone. And when he's challenged about it, he runs away. Got this man, he's a murderer, he's a coward, and he runs away. And one day, years later, he's out in the desert, walking, looking after his sheep, and God appears to him in a bush. He sees this bush on fire. He doesn't realize the significance. So he goes closer to find out more. You can read about this in Exodus chapter 3 and 4. And within that burning bush, there are bushes that catch on fire in Egypt. That happens in this very hot country. But this bush didn't burn out. It didn't get destroyed. It carried on burning. And within that bush, Moses hears the voice of God. And God says to him, Moses, I've got a job for you. I've heard my people cry out that they want to be freed, and I'm going to use you to free them. And he says, you're not. And God says, I am. And Moses says, you're not. And if you look at Exodus chapter 3 and chapter 4, you'll see 5 of the reasons that he gives. He says, look, you can choose anyone, but don't choose me. I'm a murderer. I'm a coward. And if you read on, you'll see all the other excuses. He says, I can't speak. But one by one, God gets rid of those excuses. And along with his brother Aaron, Moses heads in to see Pharaoh. You know the story. After the plagues and the Passover, the Hebrew people are set free. They cross the river. There's films made about it. And for 40 years, because of their sin, they make a journey which should have taken them 8 weeks. But they didn't trust God. Even though God had rescued them, it wasn't long before, like us, when we leave this place, we forget him. And they started saying things like, well, we'd have been better off where we were. At least we had food. All we get now is this manna from heaven. And you know that Moses goes up the mountain. He's revealed in part, just a part of God's glory. It's too much for a man to take. By the time he gets back down the mountain, the Hebrew people have made gods. They've made a golden calf to another god. But he sticks with it, and God guides them. They get into battles, and when Moses has got his hands in the air, they win. When he gets tired and they go down, they lose. So people have to hold his hands up because he's getting old. I've got no doubt that Moses would have loved to have stuck it through, gone with the Hebrew people to the land that they'd been promised. But it wasn't going to happen. God said, Moses, look, you've done enough. I called you, you followed, you've obeyed, but now it's time for you to pass the baton. There's 2 lessons from that. One is for us as Christian leaders, that we have to embrace young people, pass the baton to them. No matter how much we love the job, it's good to say, look, I believe God's calling you to do this. You can do this. Encourage them. There's one other thing, though. When God called Moses, he was about 80 years old. Some of us get to later life and we think, I think that's it. I think we're done. You see, not only was Moses a murderer, not only was he a coward, but he was an old man. But God still had loads he wanted to do through him. And despite Moses' opposition, despite Moses said, no, I can't do this, God, you've got the wrong person. Through the power of God, he could. The next person I want to talk to you about is Simon Peter. We touched on Simon Peter earlier. You remember the story. He's a fisherman. He's a hard-working fisherman. He's like the fisherman that if you go down to the Barbican on a bad night, you'll see. Real roughy-toughy. Act first, speak first, think later. Sorry to the fishermen on the Barbican, you're not all the same. But that was his character, and Jesus says, Simon, I've got a job for you. In fact, I'm going to change your name. I'm not going to call you Simon, I'm going to call you Peter, which means in that language, Petra, rock. Because it's on you. You're going to be the rock which I'm going to build my church. And the other disciples fall about laughing. They say, you got it wrong, Lord. Peter, come on, you know about him. He's nuts. He's crazy. Listen to what he does. Listen to what he says. His life's a mess. It'll all end up bad. But Jesus knows what he's doing. And even though Simon Peter's best friends say, Lord, you've got it wrong, Peter can't do it. You see, Jesus knows. Jesus knows that God, his Father, has called Peter, and it's Peter who he's going to use to build the church. I've told you some of the things that happen earlier. Of course, when it goes wrong, it's Peter who is still impetuous when the guards come to arrest Jesus on that Thursday night. Well, before that, actually, it's Peter who is the first one when Jesus says to his disciples, who do you say I am? It's only Peter who says, you are the Son of the Most High. Peter recognizes that Jesus is the Son of God. Then, on this night when they've eaten together, Judas has gone out to betray Jesus, and the guards come. It's Peter who gets out his sword and strikes the guard. He's called Malchus. Cuts off his ear with his sword. I don't know if Jesus went, Peter, but he gets the ear and he puts it back on and heals it. It's better than you. And this man who's recognized who Jesus is, he's the one that says, you are the Son of the Most High. It's Peter who's in that courtyard when Jesus is being questioned. And when this young girl says, you're with that man, aren't you? He says, I'm not. And she says, you are. And then he gets really angry. He says, I am not, and swears, and he denies that he's one of Jesus' followers. What's Jesus crucified, and then, as I said, 3 days later, he's the one that runs into the tomb. And they're out on that boat. It's been Peter's idea. Let's go fishing. They catch nothing, and Peter's thinking, this happened to us once before, didn't it? But they do what the stranger on the shore says. They put their nets out. They catch 153 big fish. And as they head back to the beach, Peter recognizes that the person who gave that instruction is Jesus. Pulls his clothes on and runs to shore. Falls at Jesus' feet. And after they've had breakfast together, Peter and Jesus sit alone in the firelight. I wonder what Peter was thinking. Jesus knows everything. I wonder if he was thinking, I'm in trouble here. But with nothing but love in his eyes, Jesus says, Peter, I've got a job for you to do. I said I was going to use you to build my church, and I am. I want you to feed my sheep, tend my lambs. And Peter, I'm going to tell you something that nobody else knows. You're going to live to be an old man. None of us know how long we've got. But Peter had that promise from Jesus. You're going to live to be an old man. And he did. You know what happens next. Jesus is ascended, and along comes Pentecost, and after that, Peter is the one who's back in front of the same group of guys that sent Jesus to death. And he doesn't care. If he'd been a coward on that Thursday night before Good Friday, he's a lion now. And he says to these people, look, you've got it wrong. He doesn't just tell them, he opens the Bible. He tells them that they're Jews, and he says, you don't understand this book that you say you do. You're meant to be the teachers of the law. You're meant to be able to be the ones that can open this book and tell us what it means, and you can't. Because the Messiah came and you didn't recognize him. They could have put Peter to death. He wasn't afraid. God had called him. Nobody thought he could do it, but he could. And in later life, you know that he was the one that had the vision that Jesus hadn't just come to die for the Jews, he'd come to die for everyone, for you and me. And it wasn't all great after that. The story goes, I don't know, how many of you have been to Rome? Have you ever been to Rome? Yeah, a few of you. You've been to see the Colosseum, I expect, and all that sort of stuff. Have you ever been to the Appian Way? If you haven't been to the Appian Way, next time you go to Rome, you've got to go there. It's much better than all the other things. If you're a lady, don't wear stilettos or anything. It's all cobbles. And back 2,000 years ago, the Appian Way was the main road into Rome. And if you were being taken to Rome to be killed, that was the way you walk. If you go to the place where, if you've seen the film Ben-Hur, where they do the chariot race and wait for the bus there, you'll be disappointed. Yeah, that's where it says you catch the bus in the guidebooks. You don't, it's around the corner. But after an hour and a half wait, Pen and I caught the bus. And you go to the catacombs and see the tombs of Christians. And then you walk along this bumpy road and you'll come to a little church. And the story goes that Peter went to Rome knowing he was heading towards his death because he'd been telling people the truth about Christ. But he wasn't perfect and he still had doubts, and he turned away and started heading back away from Rome. And an angel met with him and said, Peter, God's not let you down yet, and he won't let you down now. They built a church there. You can go. I've been in that church. And Peter went back and they crucified him. And Peter said, look, I'm not worthy to be crucified in the same way as my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. So you've got Moses who said, I can't do it. You've got Peter who other people said, you couldn't do it. But now I want to tell you about someone called George Scott. George Scott lived in the mid-1800s. Now, back in the mid-1800s, we sent missionaries from here to various countries. Now we get people coming in who love Jesus to encourage us in our faith. And back then, there was a missionary society set up by a guy called Hudson Taylor. It was called the China Inland Mission. Nowadays, it's called the Overseas Missionary Fellowship. George Scott knew he'd been called by Christ to go as a missionary to China. It's very difficult to be a missionary in China back then. There weren't boats like we have now. It took 5 months to go from Liverpool to China. If you didn't die during the journey, you ended up in a culture which was totally different to the one you'd expected. George Scott was so convinced that he went to the China Inland Mission and said, I want to be a missionary. They said, George, no. Went for the interview and they said no. So he went back, had a second interview and a third interview. And each time they said, George, no, we're not going to send you to China. This man really felt the call of God. He wasn't going to be put off by another group of Christians telling him what he couldn't do. So he said, look, I respect what you say, but is it possible I could meet with Hudson Taylor? I want to meet the boss. They said, George, if that's what you really want to do, we'll arrange a meeting. And they did. And George went to Hudson Taylor and told him why he wanted to be a missionary and how he'd felt the call of God. And Hudson Taylor said, look, George, I think it's wonderful that you want to do this, but it's just going to be too hard, brother. Why don't you stay and pray and do that? You see, the bit of the story I haven't told you is that George Scott only had one leg. And when he walked into the interview room, all people could see is what he couldn't do. This is what George Scott said to Hudson Taylor. He said, look, Hudson, there are plenty of people in this country with two legs, but they're not going to China. So will you let me, a man with one leg, go and serve Jesus in China? Hudson Taylor was so moved, he said, okay, you go. He made the journey and he went to a place called Whitell on the south coast of China. He started telling people about Jesus. It's 160 years ago. If you go to Whitell now, there's 7 million people. 10% of those are Christians. George Scott really had heard the call of Christ. I don't think he would have believed what God could do through him. But he obeyed. See, and I think that's the really important thing for us to remember. God doesn't just call the qualified. He qualifies the call. I retired some years ago and I thought I could do lots of jobs for Jesus. I thought I'd be really good at this. I could do this in the church. I could do that in the church. But that's not what God wanted for me. What he wanted for me was to do something totally different, what I do now, which gives me the opportunity to talk to people about Christ most days. There are other people who are doing the jobs that I wanted to do, who God's given them the ability to do it. And whatever you feel God is calling you to do, don't say no. You may say, oh, yeah, I'd like to do that, but I can't. I don't expect many of you are saying that I've murdered somebody. But some of you may be saying, I'm a coward. Some of you may be saying, look, I really have difficulties at times with my temper. I really have difficulties with my doubts. Some of you will say that I'm just too old. Moses was 80. I can guarantee you, whatever God is calling you to do, the only thing that he needs you to do is to say yes. You don't need to worry about whether you think you can do it. You need to get on your knees and just say, Lord, is this really what you're calling me to do? There may be jobs that you really would like to do, but God has got someone else for those jobs. We need to spend time just always having our eyes open and our minds open to listen to what God's saying to us. The only opportunity you may have to serve this week, you may be joining us online. You'd love to be here in church this morning, but you just can't make it. The only opportunity you may have is to talk to your carers or your nurse or your doctor. And you may say, times are really tough. but I'm not scared. I'm worried, but I'm not scared. I belong to Jesus. I love Jesus. I know that he will never let go of me. For others of us, we know what we want to do. God's saying, look, that may be great in your eyes, but believe you me, what I want you to do is just so much better than that. Band's going to come back and sing to us. I'm not going to ask you to stand and join them. While they sing, I'd just like you to maybe sit and pray and be open to God. You may want to kneel, you may want to stand, you may want to sit, but whatever, just have that conversation with Jesus Christ that says, Lord, I am yours. I will do whatever you call me to do.